Now, we have all kinds of new technology, so that track is slowly decreasing. So if you look at the number of people that are employed in the pure crafts, they're still there, but the numbers have gotten smaller over time. Okay? The most highly skilled craftsperson I ever knew, that I ever worked with as a mediator, were pattern makers. They were incredible what they knew. Well, you still see some of them, but God, they're relegated to a damn museum. 10 years ago, they were more than that. And now, they're not there. What do we have? Computer-aided design. Okay, what other choices did I have? Well, I guess some of you could have gone to the skilled trades within an industrial union. Well, what happened there? Well, when we look at it, there were three things that were very troublesome. When you went into the factory, we have something called the National Labor Relations Board Unit Determination. A factory has 10,000 employees in it making automobiles. It's called the Rouge plant. Well, actually, they had about 10,000, 20,000 people. And in this case, Mike, you got sent there. You ended up there. He is still holding his craft, but he's now, at first, in no union, but eventually in a union called the United Auto Workers, which was not the Carpenters Union. So when they took a vote, how many carpenters do you think Ford, other than when they had the Woodies, how many carpenters do you think Ford and the Rouge plant employed versus total employment? Not very many. When they took a vote, where do you think Mr. Mills's vote was? They were absorbed. Now, the British labor laws were very, very different. And that's why you remember old Margaret Thatcher and how they all got pissed at Margaret when they changed the labor laws over there. And the British unions really went wild. Well, what happened if you ran a side-by-side, and this was a public policy decision made in this country. Now, it wasn't made quite at this point in time, but as this progressed, eventually laws came about. In America, we made the decision that we would put the largest number of people who had a community of interest in a bargaining unit. Now, what the hell does community of interest mean? Well, it was defined as if I had 3 production workers and 1 carpenter, you have a community of interest. Why? Because you work in the same plant making what? Autos. So it didn't really address Mike's issue at all, or Bill's issue when they came in, okay? But they're now in the same unit. Now, British labor law did something different. They said that as their industrial revolution came through and they went into mass production, and they went in like building British Leyland, which made, what's the sports car? Jaguar? Jaguar. Jaguar. When British Leyland existed, they brought all the unions in its entirety. At British Leyland, they had 125 unions. That was a public policy. That policy was whatever existed came in. We could have made the same choice. We did not. Now, what was the difference between British Leyland and Ford? When British Leyland negotiated, they had to negotiate 125 contracts per year, every one of them which had the capacity to strike. Some of the unions were small enough to have 1 person in it. What do you think happened to the British Leyland? Boom, 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 boom. Over here, I got 1 contract, 1 union, 1 time, 1 risk factor. Competitively, they had 125 unions, 125 risk factors. You can see the map. That's what happened in Britain at some point. Margaret Thatcher and the Parliament made a change in the legislation. And that's what caused the British unions to have heart attacks. And why? Because now their power was gone. All the crafts' power were gone. Now, theirs evolved in, then taken away. Ours just evolved into nothing. We lost ours earlier. I don't know which was better, to be honest with you, but from a competitive position, I guess if I had to negotiate, I'd rather do it once rather than 125. The cost of it and the risk factor. But it had damaging effects to people. So that was one thing that happened to my good friends over here who went down into a factory. The second thing that came about was erosion of skilled trades through job recombinations. Saturn, my favorite car. We own 12 of them. We're the most loyal customers. But Saturn, the average number of job classifications in a typical GM plant, and Ford and Chrysler, were 125 job descriptions or classifications to make a car. Saturn had 4. The other thing we had is high technology and technicians, and which are mostly non-union. We had robots. I mean, if you project this today, we've got robots, we've got miniature electronics. We have our printer that prints parts that I brought the book in for you guys to take a look at. We've got the Arnold Air Force bases with all kinds of technology. And very frankly, I don't need a carpenter. And most of these things then went into, if you will, a technical position. And what was very precious to me that I spent years learning, very frankly, just simply disappeared. Ask yourself the question, what happened to a good electrician? A lot of it is now called electronics. And who are those people? In today's world, most of them are non-union. I mean, that's how this all kind of transpired down. So I guess I've got to probably take care of my last person. I'm sorry. You're done. Now, let's take a look at this chart. Became very important to us because it tells us a little bit about the transition. When we look at how work is organized, we obviously came from a very pure craft type of economy, craft lines. Well, we now have craft production. It's starting to shift now. The work is going someplace. How am I paid for my work? Well, instead of wage levels, and remember in the crafts, the wage levels were to cover the social programs, which eventually in today's world became health and welfare funds and things like that. So we took care of our own. Well, that's now just plain wages. And I'll tell you, Ty, who went first, his wages sure don't compare anything to the wage levels that he, as a member of the carpenter's craft, received before, even though he was a trainee aspiring to become a journeyman at some point. Okay? So that changed. All of a sudden, we started to see hierarchies come about on both sides. Management had levels. They didn't before. You just had some rich kid, or daddy gave him some money and go out and make chairs. And I say that facetiously, but there was only a level. There was an owner. But now we had managers, God forbid. Owners, managers. Managers led to more managers, led to supervisors, led to close control. The unions developed in a hierarchy also. Why? Because you couldn't protect yourself now in Los Angeles alone, Boston alone, or Detroit alone. You had to worry about, in our case, Lansing, your case, Sacramento, God help you, bless you, in Sacramento, and Massachusetts, God bless all of us. Okay, what can I tell you? But all of a sudden, things made a difference. We had to worry about what was happening elsewhere. I couldn't just worry about my local market. Now, it was national. We're moving there. Did we have any labor and employment laws? No, not at this point, but we started to sense that we need some kind of protection, some kind. Did we have any social legislation at this point? No, we didn't have any Social Security, unemployment comp, workers' comp, let alone all of the other myriad of laws that we have to protect worker rights. None of that yet. Are we discriminating? Yes, but it's a different kind of discrimination. Now we have a discrimination against people who are in unions. Before we had gender discrimination because of craft lines and racial discrimination, but it was because of the way how it evolved. But now we have discrimination against you as employees. You're now employees. God help you. So the word employee was now invented. I'm employed by somebody. Are we violent? Yes. There were reactions to this. If you listen to our friends yesterday, every time somebody invented a machine, somebody burned the damn place down. And why? Because we're scared. Now, if you go back in labor history, you'll hear a thing called Luddites. And who are the Luddites? Well, the Luddites actually started in England. They were workers, and they burned the machinery because they lost jobs. Now, eventually, the jobs gained over time. But if I'm in England, and I'm back in the 16, and the 17, and 1800s, and I've lost my job, man, that means something. There's no social platform to help me. I'm done. I'm kaput. So violence starts to become a reality. Well, there's a reaction on the other side. Now the question mark of trust becomes revenge. He has to ask himself the question in a historical context, I'm mad. Should I get revenge against Alex? And this starts to build into our system. Well, all of a sudden we moved into truly about 1830, 40, 40, 50, we moved into the mass production era in America for full. And I'd like you to look at my information box. This is what caused it in America. The American Civil War. For the North, and remember the North was generally an industrial-based economy, the South was generally an agricultural-based economy. And the issue, depending on how you study the war and how you study all of the things of slavery, was about economics, and economics dealt with people and people's freedom, and it was the economics of freedom or lack of freedom to what? To support an economic system called agriculture, called cotton in the South. That's what this was about. That war ensued, and for the weapons of the war to be necessary to fight that war, guess what? That propelled the final change for America to a mass production system. So it was the economic boost that changed that system. Now, when that happened, the last vestiges of the family lost its power. I'm really sorry, Jose.
Oh, I gotta go.
Yeah, you're gone, kid. Now, a couple of things I want you to make note of. There are 4 prominent events about your industry that happened here at that time, on or about. And during this whole time period of mass production, your birth came about as a union. You were born then. But what were those 4 or 5 events? Well, in the 1850s, we saw the first public waterworks. They employed utility workers. In 58, we saw the first gas light company, a utility populated by your future members. In 1891, we saw the first gas pipeline. We moved gas all across the country.